"Excuse me, sir, but my mother has a ring just like that one," said the 26-year-old black waiter, discreetly pointing to the billionaire's hand. The silence in Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant was instantaneous. Chayton Blackwood, a 62-year-old real estate mogul with a fortune of $3 billion, felt the blood drain from his veins as he looked at the young man who had just served him his $1,200 glass of wine. The ring that sparkled on his hand was unique. A Burmese ruby surrounded by diamonds specially created in 1942. Only two existed in the entire world. "That's impossible," Blackwood muttered, his voice betraying a nervousness he couldn't hide. The waiter, whose name tag identified him as Dakota, maintained a professional smile, but his eyes revealed something much deeper, a disturbing calm that only exists in those who have discovered truths too powerful to be ignored. Dakota Sky had been working at that restaurant for only 3 months, but he knew every detail of the regular customers' lives, especially Chayton Blackwood, the man who sat at table 17 every Wednesday. Always alone, always arrogant, always treating the staff as if they were invisible. "Maybe it's a coincidence," Dakota said, but her voice carried an almost imperceptible irony. "Although my mother always said she inherited this ring from her old boss, a very generous man." Blackwood clenched his napkin tightly enough to tear the fabric. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to process what he was hearing. The second ring, the one he had given to the young maid in 1995, should have disappeared forever along with her. Dakota watched every micro-expression on the billionaire's face. Every bead of sweat that began to form on his artificially tanned forehead. Every desperate attempt to maintain his composure in the face of a revelation that could destroy decades of reputation. "Does your mother still have the ring?" Blackwood asked, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "She did," Dakota corrected, and for the first time, his professional smile faltered for a split second. "She died 2 years ago. Cancer. She couldn't afford proper treatment." The weight of those words echoed across the table like a sentence. Blackwood knew exactly who Dakota's mother was. He knew what he had done to her. He knew why she had never reported him. He knew why she had disappeared from the city, carrying only that ring as the sole evidence of a decades-long injustice. Dakota straightened up, adjusting the tray with the elegance of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "Can I get you anything else? Maybe a photo of my mother?" She kept several from when she worked for important people. Blackwood's eyes widened. This was no coincidence. It was a silent declaration of war delivered with the surgical precision of someone who had planned every word, every gesture, every moment. "That won't be necessary," Blackwood replied, his voice higher than normal. Dakota nodded with that disturbing calm that made the air seem thicker. "Of course, sir. I'll be here if you change your mind. After all, some stories need to be told, don't they?" As he walked away from the desk, Dakota felt Blackwood's desperate gaze burning into his back. The plan that had taken 2 years to devise was finally in motion. Best of all, Blackwood still had no idea how deep the hole he had dug for himself. If this story of justice and courage is already moving you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what Dakota discovered about his mother's past and what he plans to do with that information will leave you speechless. Blackwood finished his meal in silence, but Dakota could feel the billionaire's eyes following his every move around the restaurant. It was exactly the reaction he had hoped for, that toxic mixture of paranoia and arrogance that had destroyed so many lives over the years. 2 hours later, when the workday ended, Dakota found Blackwood waiting outside the restaurant, leaning against a silver Bentley that cost more than most people earned in 5 years. "We need to talk," Blackwood said, trying to sound authoritative. But Dakota noticed the nervousness behind the facade. "Sure, Mr. Blackwood. My shift just ended." Dakota walked up to the man who had haunted his nightmares since childhood, maintaining the disturbing calm that made Blackwood feel as if he were losing control of a situation he should completely dominate. "Your mother? What was her name again?" "Winona Feather," Dakota replied simply. "She worked cleaning your mansion in Greenwich, 1995. The name hit Blackwood like a punch in the stomach. Winona Feather, the 19-year-old he had hired when she was desperate for work, pregnant, and abandoned by her boyfriend. The same Winona who had witnessed his special meetings with Russian investors in the basement of the mansion, where false documents were signed and dirty money changed hands. "I don't remember any Winona," Blackwood lied, but his voice betrayed the vivid memory he was trying to suppress. Dakota smiled. Not the professional smile he wore in the restaurant, but something much more dangerous. "It's funny how memory works, isn't it? My mother remembered every detail, especially the night you offered her that ring." The night in question had been in December 1995. Winona was cleaning the office when she heard Blackwood yelling on the phone about problems with the authorities and evidence that needed to disappear. She had hidden behind the curtain, listening to details about bribes to zoning officials and forged documents that allowed illegal construction in protected areas. When Blackwood discovered her there, standing with a cleaning rag in her hands, his eyes filled with that icy fury she would recognize for the rest of her life. "How much did you hear?" he had asked, advancing toward her. "Nothing, sir. I was just cleaning." But they both knew that was a lie. "Your mother was a discreet woman," Blackwood said, now choosing his words carefully. "She always respected her employer's privacy." "Discreet," Dakota laughed softly. "That's an interesting way to describe someone who was threatened with death if she spoke about what she saw." The memory came back with full force to Blackwood. He had given Winona the ring that night, not as a gift, but as a permanent reminder of the silent agreement between them. "This ring is worth more than you'll earn in 10 years, he had said. "But if you open your mouth about what you've heard here, I guarantee you and your baby will disappear without a trace." Winona had taken the ring with trembling hands, knowing she was accepting not just a piece of jewelry, but a sentence of perpetual silence. "She never said a word," Dakota continued. "She moved to Detroit, raised me on her own, working 3 different jobs. She always said the truth would come out someday." Blackwood tried to regain control of the situation. "Look, kid, I don't know what kind of fantasy your mother created, but I can offer you something. A better job, maybe. $50,000 for you to forget these crazy stories." The bribe was exactly what Dakota had hoped for. Blackwood still believed that everyone had a price, that problems could be solved with money. $50,000. Dakota pretended to consider the proposal. "You know, it's funny. My mother died owing $50,000. Dakota pretended to consider the proposal. "You know, it's funny. My mother died owing $230,000 in medical bills. Insurance didn't cover the experimental treatment that could have saved her life." The sarcasm in Dakota's voice was as sharp as a knife. $50,000. It's almost insulting, don't you think? Blackwood felt cold sweat trickle down his back. This waiter was not a desperate victim who could be easily bought off. There was something calculated in the way he spoke, as if every word was part of a larger plan. $100,000 then, Blackwood offered, his voice sounding more desperate. "Final." Dakota shook his head slowly. "You still don't understand, do you? This was never about money." "Then what do you want?" "Justice," Dakota replied simply. "My mother spent 29 years living in fear, moving from city to city whenever she thought you'd found us, working herself to death because she could never use references from her job at your mansion, dying in silence because she was convinced that if she spoke, I would pay the price." The truth was that Winona had tried to tell her story several times over the years. First to a local reporter in Detroit who mysteriously pulled the story at the last minute. Then to a civil rights lawyer whose office was broken into the following week and all the files stolen. With each failed attempt, Winona understood better the extent of Blackwood's power. "She died believing you were untouchable," Dakota said. "But things have changed a lot in the last few years, haven't they?" Blackwood tried one last shot at intimidation. "Watch your words, kid. I have lawyers who can destroy your life with a single phone call." "I'm sure you do," Dakota replied calmly. "But I have something your lawyers will never be able to buy or intimidate." "And what would that be?" Dakota smiled again. And this time, Blackwood felt a genuine chill of fear. "Patience," Dakota said, "and a plan that took 2 years to execute." As he walked back to his car, Leaving Blackwood standing alone on the sidewalk, Dakota felt the weight of the promise he had made at his mother's grave. Winona Feather had died in silence, but Chayton Blackwood would learn that her son had inherited not only her ring, but also her memory for injustice. Each new threat, each pathetic attempt at bribery, only fueled something inside Dakota that his oppressors couldn't see. A determination forged by years of silent suffering and tempered by the absolute conviction that the time had come for the truth to come to light. What Blackwood didn't know was that every word of that conversation had been recorded by the discreet device in Dakota's pocket, and that this was only the first move in a game the billionaire didn't even realize he had already lost. Over the next 2 weeks, Blackwood tried everything to make Dakota give up. First came the psychological pressure. Anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night. Strange cars parked outside the small apartment Dakota shared with 2 college friends. Then came the professional pressure, a casual conversation between Blackwood and the restaurant owner about problem employees who could damage the establishment's reputation. But Dakota had learned from Winona Feather that patience was a more powerful weapon than any direct confrontation. Each new attempt at intimidation only confirmed what he already knew. Blackwood was desperate. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into?" said a voice behind Dakota as he waited for the bus home on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Dakota turned and found a man in his 40s dressed in an expensive but not ostentatious suit, his eyes revealing a sharp intelligence. "You must be Chayton Blackwood. You finally decided to show up in person." "I'm Wyatt Stone, Blackwood's lawyer, and I can assure you that you don't want this going to court." Dakota smiled, that smile that was becoming his trademark. "Court? Who said anything about courts? I just mentioned that my mother had an interesting ring." Stone studied Dakota with renewed attention. There was something about the young man's calmness that didn't fit the profile of the desperate victim he had expected to find. "My client is willing to make a final offer. $250,000. You sign a confidentiality agreement and everyone goes on with their lives." "Interesting," Dakota replied, pretending to consider the offer. "But I have a counter-proposal." Stone raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because this was never about money, Mr. Stone. It's about something your client lost a long time ago and will never be able to buy back." "And what would that be?" "Peaceful sleep." The bus arrived and Dakota got on, leaving Stone standing in the rain with a confused look on his face. This was not the behavior of someone who could be easily intimidated or bought. What neither Stone nor Blackwood knew was that Dakota was not acting alone. 3 months before getting the job at the restaurant, he had sought out the only person who could help him navigate the complex legal world surrounding men like Blackwood. Celia Blue was an assistant district attorney in the Southern District of New York specializing in financial crimes and corruption. More importantly, she had met Winona Feather. "Your mother came to my office in 2018, Celia explained during her first meeting with Dakota. "She had documents, dates, names, everything we needed to open an investigation into Blackwood." "And why didn't you do anything?" "Because 48 hours later, our key witness, a former employee willing to corroborate your mother's story, died in a car accident, and 2 other contacts disappeared from the city without a trace." Dakota felt the familiar mix of anger and determination she had learned to channel. "But things are different now." "They've changed a lot," Celia agreed. "The Panama Paper scandal, new financial transparency laws, public pressure on corporate corruption. In 2018, Blackwood was untouchable. Today, he's a target." It was Celia who instructed Dakota on how to document every interaction with Blackwood. Every meeting, every attempt at bribery, every implied threat was being carefully recorded and cataloged. "He's behaving exactly as we expected," Celia said as she analyzed the recordings of the restaurant conversation. "Arrogant, desperate, and committing new crimes with every attempt to cover up the old ones." "How much time do we need?" 2 more weeks. There's a federal audit of his companies starting next month. If we can present solid evidence of extortion and intimidation before then, it'll be the final push they need to open a full criminal investigation." Dakota nodded, but his mind was already several steps ahead. Official justice was important, but he had much more personal plans for Chayton Blackwood. 2 days later, Dakota received an unexpected call at work. Dakota Sky. This is Coda Blackwood. The last name made Dakota stop immediately. Richard's brother, son, and I'd very much like to talk to you. Coda Blackwood was everything his father was not. Ethical, compassionate, and genuinely committed to social justice. At 35, he had distanced himself from the family business when he discovered the true source of the Blackwood fortune. My father doesn't know I'm calling, Coda explained during their meeting at a discreet Brooklyn cafe. But I've known about Winona Feather for years. How? Because I hired private investigators when I first began to suspect that our fortune was built on something rotten. They found evidence of at least 6 families who were silenced or intimidated over the years. Coda slid a folder across the table. These are copies of documents I got from my father's office. Fraudulent contracts, records of payments to influence public officials, correspondence about how to deal with problematic witnesses. Dakota opened the folder and felt his heart race. There it was. Decades of systematic corruption documented in minute detail. Why are you giving this to me? Because justice delayed isn't justice denied. And because I want my son to grow up knowing that when it came time to choose between family and doing the right thing, I chose to do the right thing. That night, Dakota called Celia with a single sentence. We just won the game. But even as he organized the evidence that would destroy Chayton Blackwood, Dakota knew that true revenge was yet to come because some crimes cannot be paid for with prison or bankruptcy. Some crimes must be paid for with a complete destruction of everything the criminal believes to be his identity. And Dakota had spent the last 2 years planning exactly that. While Blackwood slept in his mansion, convinced he was dealing with yet another desperate young man who could be bought or intimidated, Dakota was finalizing preparations for something that would make the billionaire question every decision he had made in the last 30 years. Official justice would be just the appetizer. The main course would be much more personal. The following Wednesday would be a night like any other at Manhattan's exclusive elite charity gala. 300 guests, each ticket costing $5,000, live broadcast on the city's major social media networks. Chayton Blackwood had bought an entire table, as he did every year, to show off his generosity in front of the cameras. It was the kind of event that fed his ego, photographs with politicians, handshakes with other billionaires, speeches about social responsibility from the man who had spent 3 decades destroying lives to build his fortune. Dakota arrived at the hotel as an outsourced employee of the catering company, wearing a discreet uniform, tray in hand, completely invisible to the guests who didn't even look at the faces of the people serving them. Champagne, Mr. Blackwood? Dakota offered, approaching the head table where the billionaire was posing for photos with the mayor. Blackwood recognized him immediately, and his face turned pale. What the hell are you doing here? Working, Dakota replied calmly. Just like my mother did when you threatened to kill her. The conversation around the table died down. The mayor and the other guests looked confused at the obvious tension between the two men. Security, Blackwood shouted, but Dakota raised a hand peacefully. There's no need for that, Mr. Blackwood. I just came to give you something that belongs to you. Dakota placed a sealed envelope on the table right in front of the cameras that were still broadcasting live. The envelope contained copies of all the documents Coda had provided, plus recordings of every attempt at bribery and intimidation over the past few weeks. You always said that every man has his price, Dakota said, his voice clear enough for the microphones to pick up. But you forgot to ask what the price of justice is. Blackwood tore open the envelope with trembling hands. As he read, his expression changed from confusion to absolute horror. There were 30 years of crimes documented in minute detail. Every bribe, every threat, every family destroyed. Where did you get this? Blackwood whispered. Your own son, Dakota replied simply. Coda has a conscience you never developed. The entire hall was silent now. The cameras focused alternately on Blackwood, who appeared to be suffering a nervous breakdown, and Dakota, who maintained the disturbing calm he had perfected over the years. Celia Blue entered the hall at that exact moment, accompanied by 4 federal agents. It was no coincidence. Dakota had timed every detail to ensure maximum public impact. Chayton Blackwood, Celia announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, is under arrest for extortion, bribery of public officials, tax fraud, and witness intimidation. The silence was broken by the sound of handcuffs being snapped shut and camera flashes. Blackwood looked around desperately, searching for an exit, an ally, anything that could save him from this public humiliation. "This is a mistake," he shouted as he was led away. "I have lawyers. I have connections." Dakota walked over to where Blackwood was being handcuffed. "Do you know the difference between us, Mr. Blackwood? You always believed that power is taking what you want from people weaker than you. I've learned that true power is using the system against those who think they're above it." Blackwood tried one last gambit. "You think this will bring your mother back? You think this changes anything?" Dakota smiled, not with anger, but with a quiet satisfaction of someone who had finally seen justice done. "No, it won't bring my mother back, but it will ensure that other mothers don't go through what mine did. And sometimes that's enough." As Blackwood was led away by the agents, Dakota turned to the cameras still broadcasting live. "My name is Dakota Sky. My mother's name was Winona Feather. For 29 years, she lived in fear of a man who believed he was above the law. Today, we proved that no one is." The event host, trying to regain control of the situation, whispered something about cutting the feed, but it was too late. The story was already spreading across social media, videos being shared thousands of times per minute. Dakota Blackwood approached Dakota amid the chaos. "Thank you," he said simply, "for doing what I never had the courage to do." "Thank you for giving me the tools to do this right," Dakota replied. As the gala guests whispered and speculated, trying to distance themselves from Blackwood before his reputation tarnished theirs, Dakota discreetly removed the small recorder from his pocket and handed it to Celia. "Today's conversation," he explained. "He tried to bribe me again just before you arrived." Celia shook her head, impressed. "You documented everything. My mother taught me that the truth always finds a way to come out. I just had to give it a little help." In the minutes that followed, as the news spread, 3 other victims of Blackwood came out of the shadows, emboldened by Dakota's courage. Families that had been silenced for decades finally had a voice. Blackwood's empire began to crumble in real time. Stocks plummeting, business partners canceling contracts, federal investigations opening in multiple states. Dakota left the hotel that night knowing that his mother could finally rest in peace. The promise whispered at her grave 2 years earlier had been fulfilled. But as he walked through the streets of Manhattan, he passed a newsstand where the first copies of the special edition were already on sale. The headline read, "Billionaire arrested in live scandal. Son exposes own father." Dakota stopped and bought a copy, not out of vanity, but because he wanted to make sure that Winona Feather's story was finally being told the way it deserved to be. On the front page, his photo was next to his mother's. 2 generations united in the pursuit of justice. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about proving that systems built to protect the powerful could be used to protect the vulnerable as long as someone had enough patience and intelligence to work within them. It was about turning pain into purpose and silence into revolution. 6 months after Blackwood's arrest, Dakota Sky was sitting in an office overlooking Central Park, not as a visitor, but as the owner. The Winona Feather Foundation, created with some of the money recovered from Blackwood's fraudulent schemes, had already helped 43 families who had suffered corporate intimidation. Chayton Blackwood, meanwhile, awaited trial in a federal prison, abandoned by his former elite friends, who fled him like rats from a sinking ship. His lawyers had managed to reduce his bail to just $50 million, an impossible sum for someone whose assets had been frozen by the courts. "Ironic, isn't it?" Celia Blue commented during a meeting at the foundation. "He spent his whole life buying people, and when he needed real friends, he discovered that money can't buy genuine loyalty." Dakota Blackwood had taken control of the family businesses, implementing strict ethical policies and a reparations program for his father's victims. "Some fortunes need to be rebuilt from scratch," he explained at a press conference that Dakota watched on television in his office. The case had become a legal landmark. Prosecutors in 5 different states opened similar investigations using the model created by Celia and Dakota to combat corporate intimidation. The Sky Blue Doctrine, as the press dubbed it, set precedents for protecting witnesses who reported white-collar crimes. Dakota never worked as a waiter again, but he kept a photo of the restaurant staff on his desk. Some of his former colleagues now worked at the foundation. Others had gotten better jobs with letters of recommendation that Dakota wrote personally. The most touching story came 3 months after Blackwood's arrest. A 60-year-old woman named Shania Little Bear approached the foundation with a case almost identical to Winona Feather's. Intimidation, forced silence, decades of fear. But this time, there was someone willing to listen and take action. "My mother died believing she was alone in this fight," Dakota said during the first hearing in the Little Bear case. "Today, no family has to face this battle alone." Blackwood tried one last desperate gambit. He offered to turn in other corrupt businessmen in exchange for a reduced sentence, but he found that even his dirty secrets had lost their value. The elite he had protected for decades now treated him like a radioactive outcast. On sentencing day, Dakota was in court. 25 years in prison. Blackwood would walk out of jail an 87-year-old man, if he walked out at all. When the two men's eyes met for the last time, Dakota felt no anger or satisfaction, just the quiet peace of someone who had turned trauma into purpose. "He wanted to know if I felt vindicated," Dakota told Coda after the hearing. "I said revenge was too small a word to describe how I felt. It was justice. It was closure. It was proof that systems can work when the right people decide to make them work." The foundation grew exponentially. Volunteer lawyers, retired investigators, idealistic journalists, everyone wanted to be part of something that was truly changing lives. Dakota had discovered that his true calling was not waiting tables, but serving justice. A year after Blackwood's arrest, Dakota was invited to speak at the graduation ceremony of the law school where his mother had dreamed of studying before pregnancy interrupted her plans. "Winona Feather never had the chance to fight for justice in the courts," Dakota told the graduates. "But she taught me that justice is not the privilege of those with degrees. It is the responsibility of those with courage." His mother's ring now hung in the foundation's main hall, accompanied by a simple plaque. Winona Feather 1976 to 2023 taught us that enforced silence is not the end of the story. It's just the beginning of a fight for those who have enough love to carry on. Blackwood had tried to use power and money to write the story the way he wanted. But he discovered that there are forces more powerful than wealth. Memory, justice, and the relentless determination of a son who refused to let his mother's legacy die in silence. Dakota Sky proved that the best revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's building something so powerful and positive that the evil they tried to do becomes irrelevant in the face of the good you create. "My mom always said that the truth has legs," Dakota reflected, looking out the window of his office. "Sometimes it just needs someone willing to teach it how to run." If this story of courage and justice touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they decide that silence is not an option.